How will the department tasked with dealing with people manage the integration of generative AI? Our organizations are all facing significant transformation, but perhaps no department more obviously than human resources. We often hear about how AI will disrupt traditional HR practices, automating repetitive tasks and providing data-driven insights for quicker decision-making. So in theory, this will give HR professionals more time to focus on strategic initiatives, employee engagement, and healthy workplace cultures. Or is that just what AI wants us to think? As AI continues to evolve, it will reshape the future of work as we know it. But how? Joining us today is Stacy Eng, who has agreed to share her thoughts and insights into generative AI workforce strategies and how this technology might impact the HR landscape. So, Stacy, welcome to In Good Company. How are you today?
Pretty good. Thank you, Dan.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today and giving us some of your time. I'll get straight into our first question, which is the question we ask all of our guests on this podcast. And that's just to give our audience the opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. So tell us about yourself in 60 seconds.
Great. So I'm Stacy Eng. I have been working in the talent development and learning development in the last 20 years. I started my career in financial services, working for major financial services investment banks such as Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, primarily in the learning and development, talent management, and also executive development space. And then I spent my second half of my career actually in healthcare, went into the healthcare industry and worked for Johnson & Johnson. And in that capacity, have done things in leading the Global Learning Organization, leading the Center for Leadership and Learning. And then the last 6 years, I'm now in the energy sector, serving in the capacity as the Chief Learning and Talent Officer. And my latest endeavor is to work on HR, AI, artificial intelligence, strategy, and change in terms of looking at the impact of AI in our broader organization.
Well, bringing a wealth of knowledge then and experience to today's episode. So we thank you for that. And I think it's fair to say, I don't think we've recorded a podcast recently that hasn't somehow included the mention of AI and the impact that might have on us. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk for a full episode speaking to you today. We know that one of the most searched questions about AI is, will AI replace our jobs? So before we go any further, let's get that one out of the way. Do you think AI will become smarter than people enough to take over our jobs?
Well, I get asked that question a lot of times, especially in conferences. That has come up quite a bit as we start to see the influence of AI in our workplace. The best quote I heard is that AI is not replacing your job, but the future of jobs is for people who know how to use AI. If you think about where we are in the age of AI today, we're equated to the fourth industrial revolution. If you think about the invention of steam engine, the invention of computers and manufacturing, the advancement of technology create new opportunities in terms of how jobs have evolved over time and the type of skills that we need for workers. As we think about this fourth industrial revolution and right now where we start to see AI come into the workplace, we need to meet more people who know how to use AI and being able to unleash that power in terms of what the tool can bring. The one analogy I would give you is the Star Wars analogy. AI is like a lightsaber. It's a super powerful tool, but you still need a master Jedi who has the right proper training, who know how to use the Force to be able to unlock the full potential of this tool. So if we see the role of HR, especially you think about what we can do in this time, is that we can have the technology advancement in AI, have IT and our technology centers continue to think about the innovation in AI and machines. But then in HR, how do we continue to upskill and reskill our workforce so that we can train up master Jedi who can actually wield this tool of AI in the workplace?
Well, what a brilliant analogy. And as a sort of a somewhat of a Star Wars fan, that resonates very well with me. So thank you for that. And you also perfectly brought up HR there. And as we've kind of mentioned in the intro, that this episode is kind of dedicated for the HR function. So let's let's focus in on them for a minute. How is AI impacting HR functions, and what skills will HR professionals need to effectively implement and manage AI technologies in their organizations?
That's a great question. I think a lot of times when you think about AI, most people think about AI in organizations. They think about their IT organization and think about their technology organization. And oftentimes they don't think about what HR can bring to the table. As we start thinking about these changes of bringing the technology into the organization, it's not just about implementation and creating adoption, but also HR has an important role to play in terms of thinking about the talent impact. How do we continue to upskill and reskill our people so that people know how to use this technology in order to unlock business value? We also need to think about, as jobs are changing, how do we continue to reinvent job and work processes and helping our employees to prepare them for those new future of work? So these are important things that HR needs to have a seat at the table and be part of that conversation with the IT organization, with the CIOs and our chief technology officers, to be able to bring that perspective about how this is changing people, process, and workplace, and being able to incorporate that into the overall AI strategy for the organization. So I feel like the role of HR is going to be changing in terms of leaning in as strategic partners to the business, to our IT organization, and be part of that discussion about how the AI strategy, particularly impacting talent, and how can we provide the right solutions and the right people strategy in order to help support this adoption and implementation of AI in the organization.
That's fascinating to hear. And I think that's really interesting about and it's not the first time actually we've heard it, where HR, there's a want for HR to be more seen at the head table, as you mentioned. One thing that also that I've been thinking about as you've been talking there is it's clear that AI is bringing change. And I guess this will look different for all of us. And for many organizations, undoubtedly, and you've kind of alluded to it there, the thought will be on that practical technological changes. But maybe what other cultural shifts, if any, do you think organizations need to make to successfully adapt and adopt AI?
Yeah, I think one of the big culture shift that I've seen in terms of being able to adopt AI in an organization is that we need to be more agile. You're starting to see more of this agile application in terms of the iteration, experimentation, and giving people the opportunity to be able to experiment with this technology. So organization needs to move much faster than what we've seen before, especially this technology is changing so fast. And we're seeing the evolution of that in exponential speed. So in organization, we have to prepare ourselves to be able to meet that speed and be able to be agile and changing and pivoting and experimenting with proof of concepts. And also being okay to learn from failures and being able to say, well, this doesn't work. Let's move on and pivot to something different. So being agile, being flexible, having that trait of being able to innovate and continue to experiment with things, and knowing when to make some changes and pivot and cut your losses and move on to the next big idea. I think that's going to be really critical for organization to adopt that agile mentality and agile mindset.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I wrote down a note there that they mentioned about the exponential speed of which AI is developing. And there was someone on YouTube that I once watched one of their videos and saying, the AI as it is now, as with all technology, is the worst it's going to be, because every moment from now on, it's just going to develop and get better and more advanced. And to think of where it was even a year ago to where it is now, it's staggering at what the capability of certain AI models can do. And which kind of asks the question of what will it be able to achieve in a year's time. So yeah, it was fascinating there. And I also wanted to just bring up what you were saying there about agility. Again, that agility piece is so crucial, I think, to being able to adopt and have therefore develop a culture of where AI can be part of the organization rather than a sort of an addition to. So yeah, it was fascinating what you were saying there. Perhaps if I could just take a moment to ask you about the role of the leader. So how is AI transforming traditional leadership roles?
I think with AI and adoption of AI, leaders need to be able to foster that environment within their organization where they are okay to experiment and to test and to be able to learn, and being okay to learn from failures and being able to move fast. So I think the leader's role is even more critical to make sure that they're providing that psychological safety in their work environment empower their employees to be able to experiment. Like we talked about the AI coming in the exponential speed is changing so fast. So we need to be able to have leaders who are incorporating that and also encouraging that in the organization and helping their teams to be able to adopt to that. So I think for a leader, definitely creating that psychological safety and environment where they're empowering their employees to be able to kind of experiment and learn from this technology and try new things, and being okay with making those decisions of moving on if the certain proof of concept doesn't work and we need to pivot quickly, and fostering that kind of agile mindset within the organization. So those are the things that I think will start to have leaders playing those roles to be able to help the organization move ahead in this fast changing environment.
And so to put myself in that leader's position where, or perhaps I'm watching or listening to this, my next question would be, well, okay, how? What would be your first step? Apart from maybe to ask ChatGPT, I'll say that again. Apart from to say to ChatGPT, how do I start a culture of psychological safety? What would be your top tip for that leader to start tomorrow to adopt AI into their team?
I think the first thing is that the leader need to have a clear vision in terms of what they would like to achieve with this piece of technology and the AI to enable, and from a business perspective. So the leader need to have a good strategy in terms of thinking about how this creates business value and being able to communicate that to their team, and then empowering their team to find that next best idea, because the leader are not close to the work and the workers are. So empowering their teams who know how to know the work and being able to identify those ideas and being able to come up with those ideas and giving them that space, giving their team space in order to propose those ideas, to talk about those and provide the sponsorship and the funding to help the team in terms of being able to experiment with proof of concepts and moving forward with trying out the ideas using AI. I think that is kind of the tip I would say to leaders is first have that strategy, understanding how this is meeting your business need, communicating that to your organization and allowing your organization to come up with the ideas because they're closest to the work. And then fostering that environment where you're providing the sponsorship and the funding to help your employees experiment, test, and try, and being okay with helping them kind of moving on and pivoting and being flexible.
And it sounds there from what you're saying, like the power of conversation is so important to that, and having that open dialogue with the team to be able to discuss, like, are there fears, are there concerns, like, as you said, what do we want to achieve, and having that open dialogue will provide, in some ways, bring that sense of psychological safety, because people will be able to ask the questions they want to ask and not necessarily have an answer for them, but just bring those questions to the table. And I think, yeah, that's a really important point there that you've kind of raised. So in terms of learning, which is what we've just been discussing there, how do you see AI being utilized on employee training and development programs? Do you see it being a tool for increasing employee engagement in that learning?
Yes, I absolutely think that the right thing, the first thing that organizations need to do is to think about upskilling their employees, being able to kind of use the tool for productivity for everyday work so that they gain the confidence in terms of being able to use it and feeling like it's helping them to save time. It's helping them to increase their productivity. It's helping them to increase that efficiency in automating some of the mundane tasks that they currently do, or helping them to make some complex processes easier and simplifying those. So being able to train up your employees to feel comfortable and having that fluency on AI and being able to use it for everyday work so that they see the power of the tool to help them in the day-to-day. I think that is the first thing that organizations need to do in terms of upskilling their entire workforce, to have that fluency and the ability to be able to do that. And then you look at how do you continue to upskill your technical workforce to be able to look at the technical aspects of that in terms of machine learning and leveraging data, being able to use that in terms of aligning to business objectives and business strategy in a business context. So those are things that will help continue to build the skills of your workforce. And those are important things for organizations to start.
And if I may, could I just ask, what do you think are the potential risks with that? And I suppose the where I'm coming from is, as we've got behind me, behind my head there, we've got the word human, and obviously AI. There's a risk that we could start to lose the human nature of the world, I guess. So what would you say are the sort of watch outs and the core and the things to be careful of by implementing AI into our workplaces?
Yeah, that's a great question. We think about all these opportunities. We just talked about all these opportunities that it can unlock and how powerful of a tool it is, but it also has risks and limitations. So in any organization like our organization, when we start thinking about implementing, deploying AI, the first thing we also think about is responsible AI. How do we put in the right safeguards in place so that it's not being used inadvertently by bad actors to create certain liability for the organization. So having those responsible AI practices in place and being able to help talk about that and also use that to assess your system as you're bringing the technology in are critical first steps for any organization thinking about AI. AI is not perfect. It's not 100% accurate. If you think about the public model in many of these large language models in the public domain, whether that's ChatGPT or OpenAI, and that is done by OpenAI, their accuracy is about maybe 70% because it's trained on publicly available information. And so you think about the responses it generates. There could be inaccuracy in the responses it generate. It could hallucinate because it is a generative tool. So it can be very creative in terms of making up responses and being very confident in giving you responses that may not be correct or creating new information. And so with that, you need to make sure that your organization is constantly looking at the responses that AI creates to validate that, to test that, and to make sure you're eliminating any hallucination, as well as any of the biases it could potentially create based on the data that is trained on. So in organizations thinking about implementing AI, having responsible AI practices, being able to bring all the key stakeholders to have a seat at the table and thinking about how do you govern implementation of AI is really critical. In our organization, we actually created a responsible AI council that has our key stakeholders from the organization, from legal, cybersecurity, from our data privacy specialists, and really looking at the changes in terms of the regulations of AI, the type of risk that it could potentially bring, and how do we make sure that we have the right safeguards and policies and practices in place so that we can deploy this responsibly to our workforce and also applying it to our business.
I love that answer so much. There was so much detail there that I think often gets overlooked, especially about, I love what you said about hallucinations, and it's a really nice way of coining it, is that, it doesn't always get everything right. It's always worth if it's a text response, just looking over it, or any sort of response, just double checking it with a before passing it on to the next stage. So yeah, I think there's some great stuff there. But I think my favorite thing about your answer there, and it's to circle back to the very top of this episode, was the kind of the Star Wars analogy, going back to the Star Wars analogy, because of course, we've got if you think of AI as the force and a lightsaber, there's every chance that it could flip to the dark side. So that responsibility, I think, is and we all know how that ended. So that, I think, that was a really great way of circling back to what we talked about in this episode. So yeah, I love that answer. So thank you. I suppose my last question before we finish, or my second last question before I ask you my very final one, is that, just as a sort of as a final top tip, based on everything we've talked about today, what would be that key takeaway in a short, sharp sentence as to what we would want, what you would want our listeners to take away to implement AI tomorrow in their workplace?
Well, a couple of things as I think about organization implementing AI. First of all, don't just look at this as a technology implementation. Really take the time to make sure that you bring in your HR, your change management, and your organizational development specialists into the conversation so that you can think about the talent impact and how we need to continue to make sure we're upskilling and reskilling our workforce to prepare them for this technology and adoption. So I think that, especially for those who are listening, especially I'm talking to an HR audience, that would be critical for us to think about, is how to make sure that we bring HR to the seat of the table and be able to think about the talent implications and how best to address that. I think that's first and foremost. The other thing is related to what we just talked about, is that with great power comes great responsibility. And so AI is a powerful tool, like you just mentioned with a Star Wars analogy. So making sure that you're thinking about responsible AI and how your organization needs to take this tool and be able to implement it, and with responsible safeguards and policies in place, so that you're not inadvertently creating those hallucinations or biases that this tool can create. And also it can come in the hands of bad actors, right? So how do you prevent that through your cybersecurity efforts? So really thinking about some of the potential risks and how to mitigate that and make sure you're implementing the technology responsibly and having that governance and counsel with the right stakeholders in place to have this conversation. So those would be the two things I would suggest to organizations starting on this journey. Is one, make sure you bring in your HR partners and think about the talent implication and don't see this as just the technology implementation. And then two, bring in all the right stakeholders to think about the governance of responsible AI in your organization.
Amazing. I think there's loads to take away from today's episode. So I could talk to you for a lot longer about it, but I realize we're coming to the end of time. So thank you ever so much again. I'm going to finish by asking you the same question that we end all of our podcast episodes with. And it's a bit more of a personal question, which is, if you were to start your career again, knowing what you know now, what would be the best piece of advice that you would give your younger self?
I would say to my younger self, find something that is of a passion when you think about your career and the roles that you're going to be in, because you want to be able to wake up every day and feel like you want to go to work because you're passionate and interested about and care about what you're going to do. So I would look for opportunities for my younger self to get into those roles. And also being able to learn and find my passion area where I can continue to flourish and also learn from it and continue to feel great about coming to work every day.
Well, I think that's some great advice. And I think what is clear from talking to you today, that you still live by that advice, which is great, because it sounds like you work around a topic that you're so passionate in that it emanates from you. So yeah, I think that's great. Well, Stacy, thank you ever so much again for joining me today and talking all about HR and AI. It's been a fascinating conversation. I'm sure our audience will agree. So that just remains for me to say that if you would like to learn about any more about either Impact or Stacy or myself, then all of the links that you will need will be in that description of where you found today's episode. And whilst you're there, why not have a look at our back catalogue of episodes, because there's loads more for you to go and watch or listen to on various platforms. So thank you once again to Stacy Eng for joining me today. And until the next time, take care.